This is a part of a little series I've been doing that reviews the future, the internet, people who are actively setting out in their own lane to resist simply becoming part of a larger entity, um, when so much of our world seems to be geared toward that. And I thought you were a perfect candidate because you've been totally in your own lane the whole time. Um,
Right.
so here's my intro to you question. Um, I've been reading lately through this book about equating a brand to a promise, right? We create something that people are willing to come back to by satisfying their needs over and over. And I'm really interested in this question for people who are totally on their own, who are not operating under a larger entity, and who have made this promise on their own. So that'd be my first question: is what do you think of as your personal brand, the promise that you've made to your readers or your consumers, whoever they may be?
So I'm not trying to be difficult or anything, but I really dislike the term brand, especially in this context, and
Mm,
also consumer, especially in this context.
hmm.
Um, I think that I've often said, mostly seriously, that any sentence that contains the word brand is almost certainly bullshit.
Hmm.
And and I think that, one way to understand that statement is, if brand means something other than reputation, then I'm not sure what it is, right? I guess sometimes people use it to mean indicia, or the reputation that is that accompanies indicia. Like, you see the union label, and it was made by a union worker or something, and that you could call that something beyond reputation. It's reputation plus a sign, say.
Hmm.
Um, but the the sorry, I just blew my buffer for a second. But if brand just means a promise,
Hmm.
I don't know how a promise is anything other than a reputation. So
Hmm.
like um it just feels like a kind of a bit of puffery,
Sure.
like a way of putting on airs and saying my reputation isn't a reputation, it's a brand.
Hmm.
And the way that this dovetails with the problem I have with the consumer is it characterizes the relationship between um, writers and audiences, or artists and audiences, or um, people and their governments, or people and their doctors, or people and their libraries, as
Hmm.
being a consumptive one in which they are kind of creating market signals by voting with their wallet. And voting with your wallet is I think of it as a fairly pathetic undertaking, like literally pathetic, like it has a lot of pathos. Uh, Voting with your wallet means that the people who have the biggest wallets get the most votes. Uh, that's not a very happy thought. And there's another way to vote, which is by voting, right? There's another way to be in the world apart from being a consumer, which is to be like a citizen, or an audience member, or a patron, or a patient, or whatever. So, when I hear, like, I really bristle when I hear, for example, lawyers, or not lawyers, librarians talk about uh, customer service,
Hmm.
right? Because the point of a library is not to have customers. The point of the library is to have patrons, right? It's a different relationship. It's like if your doctor called you a customer.
Hmm.
You're not your doctor's customer. You're your doctor's
Right.
patient. And
Hmm.
your doctor's job is not to deliver customer service, it's to keep you healthy.
Hmm.
um so all of that said, that in fact in some ways encapsulates the promise, such as it is, to my readers, which is that I view them as more than consumers,
Hmm.
and I view our relationship as more than consumers and producers. There's an element of uh, peer critique and peer relation between us, but there's also, because this is internet writing, there's
Hmm.
a slightly different relationship than you would get in, say, periodical writing or newspaper writing, where newspapers and magazines have a kind of implied promise that is, we sat down to figure out what kind of person we wanted to appeal to, and then we set out to appeal to them. And if you're reading this, there's a good chance you're one of those people. And so if we've fallen short of the mark, we failed not just you, but ourselves.
Mhm.
And with internet writing, it's quite different. Although there are internet publishers who are doing that, right? Who are like, I want to find males 18 to 34 who play a lot of video games because I know advertisers will pay to reach them.
Yeah.
My internet writing has always been, I want to write the things that I want to read, and I want to use that writing as a kind of a kind of mating call to find other people who feel the same way as me, who want to read the
Mhm.
same things I do. And so there's a kind of criticism of my work that violates this promise of I'm going to see you as more than a consumer or whatever, which is or that gets to a nuance that isn't captured by that, which is I wish you had written something different. And or I don't like your writing.
Mhm.
Both of those things are fine, but not relevant to me. Those are you problems,
Yeah.
right? And like, I am like completely fine if you don't want to read my work, and I am completely fine if my work isn't appealing to you, or if the subject that I have isn't appealing to you, and if like hitting the spacebar to scroll past the one article I wrote today that you didn't like is too much work,
Mhm.
then don't bother coming back tomorrow, right?
Mhm.
I set out to find the people who wanted to read the things I wanted to write. And if you're not one of those people, no shame, no hard feelings, and adios.
Mhm.
And that's the other half of that promise, I guess.
I think that's a perfect answer to that question. Even despite your bristling at the actual terminology of all that, it definitely echoes with something that you said to me last time we chatted, which was conversation is king and content is just sort of a pipeline for that
Thing
conversation.
for people to talk about. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, Sorry if I misquoted you there, or if that's
No,
a
no,
book
no,
from
that's
a
fine.
piece.
Yeah.
Um, that actually kind of segues perfectly into the next thing that I wanted to ask, which was about pluralistic and the sort of authenticity of that. Just how extremely straightforward that is as kind of like an information diet type, almost like a funnel, right? For people to read better, absorb better knowledge without having to read as much, or at least that's the way it seems to me. Was that kind of the intent of that? Was it intended to be sort of like an information diet, um, lap band, as it were? uh,
Uh, yeah, I don't know. So, I mean, the story of pluralistic is that I had somewhat traumatic, although in retrospect perfectly fine, and long overdue even break up with Boing Boing, where we're all fine now, but it was quite sudden. I felt terrible when it happened. I had an internet habit of writing for 20 years every day. I'd written tens of thousands of blog posts, and I wanted to continue to 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 do that. I found it creatively very satisfying. I found it artistically satisfying. I found it artistically uh useful in the sense of locating an audience and keeping that audience warm between books or appearances, so that there was a reason for them to come out and see me when and buy the books and whatever, and kind of help me make an artistic living.
mhm,
And also it was useful to my activism work for much the same reason, right? Having cultivating an audience meant that there was an audience for the activist causes I cared about. So
mhm,
all of those things meant that I didn't want to stop, right? I had the habit, I had the artistic satisfaction, I had the commercial reasons, and I had the political reasons to keep going. And
mhm,
I kind of went back to basics. I went back to the writing I did on the web when I started writing on Boing Boing 20 years before. We didn't have ads. We barely had cookies, and it was only in fact, we probably didn't when we started. And to the extent that we ever did get cookies, it was like to hook together this very janky commenting system that was managed by a third party that we, self-service platform that we just used and kind of pasted links into manually for each post.
mhm.
And those were like, that was the good internet, right? Those were the good days. And I was like, I miss the good internet. I miss the internet that doesn't have interrupters asking you to subscribe to a newsletter, that doesn't have a long privacy policy that no one reads because everyone knows it's bullshit, that that has teasers or whatever. And I was like, I am going to write the best work I can. and I'm going to syndicate it everywhere. There's a name for this. It's post own site share everywhere, or syndicate everywhere, posse. And the idea is that the permalink, the canonical version of your text, is at your website, and and then you repost it everywhere else. And everyone is, the kind of holy grail of posse is an automated tool chain where that just happens automatically. You write it once, you hit a button, and it just shows up everywhere. Practically speaking, that doesn't exist. I manually handcraft every day's post on every platform that I post it to. It's a gigantic amount of work. The platforms hate it. The platforms are at war with me.
Yeah.
They don't want me to do the thing that I do. Tumblr just broke copy and paste. Like, I can't believe that a website managed to break paste.
Wow.
That they broke and paste. If I paste text into Tumblr, it doesn't work anymore. I have to do a whole dance to paste text into Tumblr, which means that if I write the text in a text editor instead of in Tumblr's editor, which is what Tumblr wants me to do, then I'm stuffed, and it just adds more steps to it. Twitter just broke threading. I posted a long thread today, about 80 tweets, and after 25, Twitter now requires you to post each subsequent stanza in the thread individually, hit reply, find that post, and then hit reply to it. You can no longer queue up a thread. But then also at about 70, it just starts breaking. It just says post not found, reload, post not found, reload.
Genius.
And you've got to sort of clear your cookies and log back in, and clear your cookies again and log back in, and reopen it and open it into a different browser and whatever. And eventually, like, it comes back, and then you can add another tweet to it. That was what, like, the final 7 or 8 tweets of today's thread required me to do, right? I think I logged into Twitter like 28 times today. So it's just a gigantic amount of work, but the idea is to meet people where they're at.
And that's everywhere for you.
Everything that isn't owned by Mark Zuckerberg, and probably soon everything that isn't owned by Elon Musk.
I was going to ask, what's the distinction there?
Well, historically, you can think of there being like this 2x2 grid for the approach that platforms bring to the internet. And on one axis is surveillance, and on the other axis is control. So like Google wants maximum surveillance, but doesn't care where you are, because their surveillance is everywhere and they can follow you around wherever you are. Right. And Apple wants total control, and historically didn't want any surveillance, although now it turns out they spy on you on their platform. And the same way that Google now tries to lock you into its platform. Like, both of these distinctions have slowly eroded. And but Facebook historically was the first very successful platform that was doing both. Right? Facebook kept you in its walled garden and spied on you all the time. Now that's become more common across all the platforms. And I say everything that isn't owned by Mark Zuckerberg, but I haven't joined Blue Sky, and that's a separate question. But I am now officially old. I'm 51. I have 2 artificial hips. As soon as I can get a couple of weeks off, I'm getting corneas in both my eyes fixed, and we'll have 20/20 vision for the first time since I was a kid. As an old person, I no longer care how things work, and I only care how they fail. I've just lost too much, experienced too much hardship, been through too much heartbreak, and I just want things that fail gracefully. And that means that I am never, ever, never say never, but I have no plans to ever join another service unless it is federated. Not federatable, hypothetically, at some date in the future, but actually federated right now. Because I want to be able to leave. Because if I can't leave, on the one hand, that invites the people who own the platform to abuse me because they know that I can't go. Right. And on the other hand, if they do abuse me, then I'm stuck. Right. So I just want to go. I just want to have platforms that I can leave. So I am leaning heavily into Mastodon and the Fediverse, weaning myself away from Twitter, hoping that Automatic, who own Tumblr, make good on their promise to integrate that into the Fediverse. Threads
is a Fediverse play, right?
So, well, no, it's not a Fediverse play. It's a planned Fediverse play. Right? Like, someone saying someday I'm going to put an emergency exit in this airless bunker that I've locked you into with me is not the same thing as having an emergency exit. Right. And like, the reason I don't want to go there is I don't trust them. And among the things I don't trust them to do is do the thing that they say they're going to do that would make them trustworthy.
Yeah. That's absolutely valid. I actually have one of these quick takes is kind of perfect to follow that up with. I was going to
Sure.
ask you if you chose one social media platform that has the highest likelihood of being more popular in 10 years and one that is likely to have collapsed by then, do you think you could make
Well,
any kind of certain guess?
so I don't like prediction because it's fatalistic and implies that what we do doesn't matter. So what I'll say is I am working to make sure that Facebook ceases to exist in a decade and that the Fediverse is the most popular platform in a decade.
Great answer. Do you think there's a meaningful end to the Fediverse other than Mastodon right now? Because I've struggled to find.
Yeah, no, Mastodon's the big one, but I think that there's a lot of Goodreads refugees who are using Bookworm.
Mhm.
Uh, and there's a fair number of people involved with video, especially video. YouTube is kind of hostile to remix stuff by adult performers, whatever, who are using the video platform. I forget what it's called. I don't use it
Mhm. The video platform for what?
for the Fediverse.
Oh, got it, got it.
So ActivityPub can do all the things that every social media platform does. Mastodon is the ActivityPub app that does basically Twitter, but there
Mhm.
are ActivityPub apps that you can build that do everything every website does.
Yeah.
And so those are, different people are building them, they're volunteer run and so on. There's a bunch of stuff about Mastodon I don't like. I mean, I'm not pretending that it's perfect. The difference is that if there's something about Twitter I don't like, I have to beg Elon Musk to fix it. And if
Mhm.
there's something about Mastodon I don't like, I can either write that software myself or pay someone or convince someone else to write it. And it's true that like it's been a long time since I've written software and I don't have any extra money to pay a software author, but like we can't pretend that that isn't a much bigger pool of possible ways to amend a service that you rely on than just begging a benevolent dictator to see things your ways.
Mhm. Absolutely. To follow on to that, I wanted to ask you about writing platforms because there's a million of them. Do you see any of them as being more suited to this sort of like, I guess, like more open source, less controlled flow of information?
You mean like Substack when you say Rent and Medium?
Substack, Medium, Mirror, Ghost.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle to understand what they are. I mean, I get paid to write a column for one of them.
Mhm.
They don't know if they're publications or if they're platforms or what. I don't know how they're not blog sites, right? I don't know how they're not just a CMS. Like it seems to me like if you hook an email gateway and a payment gateway up to your blogging site and then give it a wide gutter, you can call it a writing platform. But
Mhm.
it doesn't feel to me like the actual affordances are all that different. In fact, if anything, they're just a little more constrained. Um, so far, it feels like the platforms that have paid writers a lot to write on them have mostly just spent their shareholders' money, right?
Right.
It's like, but that's what Substack did.
Mhm.
Um, the Patreon's probably the exception. As far as I know,
Or leave in
Patreon
a writing
is
platform necessarily.
no, but there's obviously a lot of people who write on Patreon.
Yeah. I think Patreon is a really interesting example because it's very, by the users for the users in its way.
Mm-hmm.
I would.
Although they keep having these commercial pressures where they, threaten to do something awful and then everyone gets pissed off, kicking adult performers off or whatever.
Mhm. Reminds me a lot of Tumblr, and plenty of other sites that have had this sort of like evolution throughout time. Do you think it plays differently this time?
Well, I think that Tumblr and Patreon have totally different reasons to not want adult content.
Mhm.
Uh, with Tumblr, it's because they were going to get kicked out of the App Store,
Right.
and 60% of their revenue came from ad impressions on the App Store.
Mhm.
And so they would have just gone broke. Basically, Apple made Tumblr stop doing it.
Yeah.
Patreon doesn't have that problem.
Didn't Tumblr reintroduce it though? Adult content?
Kind of. They've introduced it into a they've introduced like a you can't put like porn, but you can put adult material. You have to flag it. And I think they keep the flag stuff out of the app. I think that's how they finessed it.
That makes some sense. That's a great transition into enshittification, which I wanted to ask you about, and whether It seems to be accelerating. I guess like for viewers of this video, enshittification is this phenomenon you've described where the constant push toward mass appeal media and monetizable, advertisable content makes that content degrade rapidly, and the cultures that content is produced in degrade rapidly. Um, do you think that we're reaching or at any kind of tipping point for that, or that such a thing is possible?
So I don't think that's quite the right characterization of enshittification. So
Mm-hmm.
enshittification, on the one hand, it's like a mechanic, right? It's like a way for platforms to do a bait and switch where they first allocate value to end users, find a way to lock those end users in, use those locked in end users as bait for business customers, lock those business customers in, withdraw value from both business customers and end users, and allocate it all to themselves and leave behind a pile of shit.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the like the what. There's the how, and then there's the why. And the how is it's very digital, right? Like all of this stuff requires that you be able to change underlying business logic for free on the back end really cheaply, right? That you can like
Yeah.
change prices and change the way you allocate ad revenues, or the way that, you know, an algorithm promotes content or whatever. You need to be able to like say, okay, we want sports bros on TikTok, find some random sports bro and give him 10 million page views.
Mm-hmm.
So that he runs around and acts like a Judas goat and tells all the sports bros that TikTok is the world's greatest sports bro content platform. And makes them all think that they're just bad at TikTok when they show up and they don't get the 10 million page views.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all very digital. It's not a thing that like the analog world could do. And moreover, these platforms exist. Well, I would say that's the how. And then the why is that these platforms, on the one hand, lack competition, right? They've been given free reign to buy their competitors, or to use things like predatory pricing, where you sell something below cost, burning capital from your shareholders to keep people from entering the market. Think of Amazon spending $100 million basically giving away diapers for free to put diapers.com out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the competition is gone, nobody wants to fund another competitor because they know that you're going to do it again.
Yeah.
And so the space is yours. And then on top of that, there's a suite of laws, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, software patents, software copyright, non-disclosure, non-compete, tortious interference theories of contract, and so on, that make it impossible for users or small companies acting on behalf of users, or even big companies acting on behalf of users, to change the business logic back. I call changing that business logic twiddling, and I call this counter twiddling. So if you want to twiddle the knobs back, right? If you want to make an ad blocker for apps, so one of the things that everyone who's got a content platform keeps experimenting with is just how many fucking ads they can put between you and the content.
Oh,
right? So YouTube was experimented with 20 ads before a video as a pre-roll. You know, Elon Musk keeps twiddling the knobs, and people will go on and say like, I'm looking at Twitter on iOS and I'm getting 3 ads for every post.
yeah.
Right. And one of the ways to discipline firms' conduct in that regard is to have an ad blocker. And on the web, you can just have an ad blocker. Web's an open platform. But
Yeah.
because apps have got digital rights management, the reverse engineering step needed to add the ad blocker is itself a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're getting into the why. Why do firms do this? Well, because they have cleared out all their competitors. When you have a total or near total market share, or when the market is split among 2 equally sized firms that are unlikely to budge. So, you know, think Facebook and Google dividing up the ad market like the Pope dividing up the New World, or think of Google with 90% of ads, right? Or of search, rather. Google is not going to make more money by attracting new people to search. There are no more people to come to search. So their growth can't come from search. It has to come from extracting more money from search users. It means they can only grow by extracting more value from other partners in their chain, in their value chain. So if you know anything about the history of Web 2.0, there's, you know, this famous quote from Tim O'Reilly that companies should emit more value than they capture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that when you couple that with acquisition driven and predatory pricing driven growth, then you eventually end up with a place where the only growth that you can achieve is by reversing that and capturing more value than you realize for your stakeholders.
Right.
And so you have companies that are motivated to capture this value, right? Because they can't capture, they can't grow by just making better things. They are also structurally, they have this structural flaw that comes from scale that makes the pursuit of that value actually deadly to the firm itself. So when a company is very big and it says to all of its product managers, go forth and find ways to grow your bottom line this quarter.
Right.
Right.
Optimize.
And when
optimize. Yeah.
Yeah, optimize.
Now.
Go find a source of value that hasn't been tapped, right? Go find the source of value that hasn't been tapped.
Yeah.
And you and so you send out this directive, and then there's no way for them to do that except by extracting value from either users or suppliers. Then they end up doing something to make life worse for one of those. And so like they're pulling out a Jenga block. And it's not, there are like lots of Jenga blocks, and it's a big company, and like there's lots of Jenga blocks to pull out, but they're not coordinating, right? So they're like pulling out adjacent Jenga blocks. There's also a kind of race where they know that like their real competitor in a large firm that's captured most of its market. I mean, this from when your mom worked at Disney, is another executive at that firm, right? Like what you are really competing for is to see which of you can realize the KPIs most aggressively and capture the largest share of the bonus pool that is available to executives at these firms. And so they are all incentivized to do this, and they are also all incentivized to hide that they're doing it, so it's never done in a coordinated fashion. So that's how you get this platform decay. So you have platforms that don't have competitors. You have platforms that have the legal right to stop users and competitors and nonprofits and whatever from intervening to unwind their antisocial conduct. You have individuals within the firms who have the power and the motive to behave antisocially and to hide it so that it's never clear the extent of it until the whole system is so hollow that the Jenga tower falls over. And so like part of the point of enshittification is this is not about the specific avarice or foolishness or moral failings of tech executives. This is about the like nigh inevitable consequence of a market in which we have neither competition nor regulation. And of course, the way you get regulation is by having competition, because when there's only a few companies in the market, they're very hard to regulate because they're so big that regulators can't hold them to account. And ultimately, the only people who understand how they work are themselves, which means that the regulators inevitably end up being veterans of those companies. So you have this revolving door. So companies that face neither competition nor regulation face no discipline. And without the discipline, they grow to these unsustainable scales. And then they seek to continue their growth through raiding their suppliers and their customers. And they do so in a way that is chaotic, uncoordinated, and ultimately destructive of the firm. And that's the enshittification thesis. It's not just, this is how content businesses end up, right? We had advertising from like, they found advertising in Vesuvius, right? In Pompeii, right? So we've had advertising for thousands of years. Nobody followed people around to figure out what they wanted to decide what ad to show them, right? Like that was like a policy choice that grew out of a policy framework where we decided not to have comprehensive privacy legislation. And it was just like, it's totally contingent. It's not inevitable. It's nothing about the content business. It is just this weird historic blip that should be best understood as something that didn't need to happen and will probably stop happening soon.
I think you put a great point on it, that it's enabled by this optimization, right? We could not have done it without this amount of data. And well, I do want to ask, like, what makes you say you think it'll stop soon? Like this kind of exploitation has been going on, as you've said, like even this sort of corporate profiteering and like continuously making things worse for your customers to make things better for you.
Right.
Why should it stop?
Well, anything that can't go on forever does eventually stop. That's Stein's law, right? And we are in a situation in which a larger and larger pool are more and more dissatisfied. And the political economy of regulation starts with political will. And so if lots of people are angry about something, it opens up the space to do something. It doesn't guarantee that something will be done or that it'll be a good thing that gets done, but it does open up that space. And so we are, moving into a situation where the partisans for this kind of reform are much larger. They don't necessarily all understand that they're on the same side. Like there's a report about how cars are significantly worse now than they were because of the electronics in them. And it's because the electronics in them are being designed to be extractive, right? To like support subscription services and so on.
Yeah.
Everyone knows about BMW seat heaters and stuff.
Yep.
And so like there's lots of reasons that that's bad. Like one is that no one wants it, but also like now you're designing electronics into the car that treat the owner of the car as an adversary. And so like anytime they misbehave and the owner tries to figure out how to make them work, the car interprets it as an attack and kind of locks itself down.
But I mean, that kind of adversarial programming has been inherent in so many designs. Like I would definitely think of it like, first off, like China has had, since EVs have existed, like a law that requires them all to have government enabled trackers.
Right.
And they say it's like for traffic, right? For traffic optimization or whatever.
Sure. It probably is. That just doesn't mean that's the only thing it's used for.
Right. What? Yeah, I guess like, how is that different in this context?
Well, I mean, I think that China's not a country we should seek to emulate. Like, I think the problems of Chinese technology as a source of control and extraction are well rehearsed and should be something we aspire to avoid, not emulate.
Right.
In the case of China, I think there's just kind of a raw exercise of authority. In a regime of nominal rule of law like we have here in the United States, this emanates from those rules against counter twiddling. So the once you say to companies, the power of the state is available to you to use to punish people who reconfigure the things that they own in ways that make your shareholders sad, like they'll put it in, right? Like, it started the DMCA, Section 1201 of the DMCA that bans circumvention.
Right.
It started as a means of protecting like DVD players from being deregionalized and stopping people from making like Sega CDs without paying to use the Sega press.
Yeah. No bending rules. Yeah.
Yeah. It was about felony contempt of business model, right? It was about like forcing unrelated third parties to arrange their affairs to benefit your shareholders and invoking the state to do it. And, it metastasized from there into printers. You got Lexmark trying to do it with toner cartridges. And then subsequently, as processors became cheaper, it worked its way much more successfully into ink cartridges. And then you saw it in sort of IoT gadgets. It got a real goose when Apple used the App Store to make it work, and they locked they locked a device to an app store and then used the law to make it illegal to unlock it, so that a person who owned a device and a person who wrote software for it couldn't do business among themselves without cutting an Apple for 30% and giving Apple a veto over whether the transaction took place. And now it's everywhere, right? And I think that's like it's a very different path to the one China's on.
I do think we are like in parallel in certain ways, though. Just in terms of, I think like the defanging of citizens' right to repair and several other things like that are clear indications that power is being moved very consciously into the hands of the Enshittifiers.
Sure. I'd say that, the difference is that America thought that tech would be a source of soft power abroad. And then its spy agencies quietly realized that tech was also a source of surveillance data at home, that you could run them as an off-the-books surveillance network. And, if you know the history of the Snowden leaks, one of the things that came out really quickly is that the tech platforms thought they were giving data to the spy agencies through something called Prism, only when they were asked. And it turned out that Prism was a cover for something else called Upstream, where they were spying on all the data, not just the data they asked for from the tech platforms, The reason that tech platforms got angry at the spy agencies after the Snowden revelations was because they found out that Prism was just like a sham. So that if they ever wondered about how it was that the spy agencies knew so much about their users, they would think it came from Prism, that it was the data that they had consensually given to them, and not not that they were just like hoovering up all of the platform's data as it moved between their data centers on unencrypted fiber links. China, I think, explicitly saw the growth of domestic technology as a source first of as a problem, right? A problem where they needed to build a great firewall and so on to stop people from doing bad things, and then subsequently as a source of power within their country. And then ultimately there's an element of soft power abroad. You see China exporting through Belt and Road, exporting surveillance technology and logistics technology with a lot of surveillance technology in it to de facto client states, which is a thing America does too. And so, they are converging on the same thing, right? They are converging on the same outcome, but they're pursuing it from very different angles, and the political economy is really different. The coalition that enables it is different. The underlying dynamics are different. Yeah, they're getting to the same place, but the reason all this other stuff matters is that it tells us what to do about it, right? It tells us where the fracture lines are. It tells us where the weaknesses are.
Absolutely. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, wow. Going from there, gosh, yeah, that was a good answer. I wanted to ask a little bit more about that paradigm, right, wherein we're evaluating tools continuously based on their advantage to us versus their damage to us, especially in this sort of like information age where it's not just like, oh, like I built this thing, only I will use it. That's a pretty unlikely outcome. And so everyone is sort of optimizing toward this, like, what does it mean to create tools that like we can use best and others can't really use as well? Do you think there's
actually there's a name for this in the spy agencies? It's called NOBUS, and it stands for no one but us is smart enough to figure this out. So when the spy agencies discover vulnerabilities in widely used pieces of software that domestically people are using, and don't disclose them to the firm that makes the software so that they can weaponize them against their adversaries, they rationalize that no one will use this against the American public because of NOBUS. No one but us is smart enough to have found this bug. So if you remember the WannaCry worm, the reason it was so virulent and it shut down, like the city of Baltimore was stolen by the WannaCry worm. Like this was a big national security issue. All the IT in Baltimore stopped working, hospitals stopped working, people died, a pipeline went down, like it was bad. And WannaCry was a leaked NSA weapon. Right, it used this Eternal Blue vulnerability that the NSA had discovered, and then the NSA lost track of it and it leaked, and then like petty fucking criminals used WannaCry used Eternal Blue to make WannaCry and trash the country. And that's NOBUS. That's NOBUS at its core. This idea that you build tools and the assumption that they'll never be turned against you.
Right. Wasn't that also a worm? Like, didn't it just propagate through unguarded machines like as quickly as possible?
Yeah, but the vulnerability that it propagated on was the Eternal Blue vulnerability. It was a Windows, I don't remember which version of Windows 10 and Windows 11 vulnerability that the NSA had discovered and then weaponized and then not reported. To Microsoft because they wanted to preserve it as a vector for installing malware on their own adversaries' computers.
Right. As a follow-on to that, if NOBUS can't work with certainty for entities like the NSA or national security agencies in general, how can individual creators of open source tools even hope to create tools that have any kind of wall around them, any kind of moat like that, where you could hope that it would be used for the thing you intended, but not for the thing that is opposite to what you intend?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a question of whether that is a thing that people who make open source tools should even concern themselves with, right? Do hammer makers worry about people who bash in each other's brains with hammers,
Right.
right? And there's always going to be something that you can do to increase the safety of a tool or the ease with which a tool can be abused, but there's always going to be a cost to that, and that cost eventually outweighs the utility, right? Trying to make things that are like abuse proof entirely just makes them useless. And in any security system, you are always choosing something to be secure from, and the which threat you worry about speaks volumes about your values. So, if you're thinking about like this scandal that the New York Times podcast is talking about with Yale and its fertility clinic, where the fertility clinic had women who were coming in to get egg extractions, which is, an incredibly invasive procedure. It's like a long needle through the wall of the vagina into the ovary that extracts these eggs.
Right.
And the women who were involved were just screaming the roof down and begging for more pain medication, and being told that they were not able to get more pain medication because there was a limit to how many opioids they could get, because there was this whole opioid system to stop people from becoming addicted and from addicts from tricking the medical practices into giving them more drugs than they needed, and so on. It actually turned out that the system was busted, that there was a nurse who was addicted to fentanyl who was stealing all the fentanyl and replacing it with saline. And so these women had no anesthesia at all.
Yeah.
And it was really bad. And
I didn't read the story. That's hellish.
oh yeah. And so the system was designed to protect opioids from abuse, but not to protect patients from pain.
Yeah.
And it wasn't designed to protect opioid users, opioid abusers, opioid addicts. It was designed to protect the opioids.
Right.
And I think that when open source free software, it has different failures that it seeks to protect against. I mean, I think the big one is enclosure. And there is a very important and maybe even irreducible sense in which guarding against enclosure is incompatible with guarding against misuse. Because you guard against enclosure with the most broad and least onerous terms, where the only restriction you place is restriction aimed at preventing enclosure, right? Like you say, oh, the source has to be published. You can't use it unless you publish the source. But not here's how you must use it.
Yeah. Word. That reminds me of this thing that I keep seeing around, which is those who learn history, or those who don't learn history, are doomed to repeat it. Those who learn history are doomed to watch others repeat it.
That's pretty good. I like that. It's a little like I think it's Warren Buffett who said the markets are a system for transferring money from impatient people to patient people.
Right. Callous as possible.
Yeah.
What an evil man. Yeah, I wanted to ask you a bit about AI. I think it's put a pretty interesting point on a lot of the, not just ethics, but also like conversation and content issues that have been going on for decades. Because it is, in a sense, like its own kind of enshittification, right? Like they take everything, they give you a product and you give them all of your attention slash, whatever emotional capital that you would have otherwise given to those people whose data it was sourced on. And it creates this like alarming pattern, not just for artists, but kind of for everybody, kind of for anyone making anything that goes online. I wanted to ask, like, what kind of, do you foresee any protections emerging? I know there's already been an EU AI Act. I've heard that there is like a severe disincentive for the US to differ from that AI Act because companies are likely lobbying to have the same restrictions globally, even as new as they are. But do you think there's any way that, I guess, like especially we as citizens or as engineers can combat that? Yeah.
I mean, I think we have to like define what we're worried about and what we're upset about and whatever. And like, because that you can't address an underscoped problem. You can't solve an unscoped problem, right?
Mhm.
And you know, I worry about a bunch of things with AI. I mean, I hate calling it AI because it's not AI. It's just, you know, statistical inference engines or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's just
Uh, it's not intelligent. It's not artificial. It doesn't learn. You know,
mhm.
whatever, right?
It's just
Um,
everybody. Yeah.
but I think that you know, I worry about like the usual stuff, right? Algorithmic bias, the environmental footprint.
Mhm.
Um, I worry about privacy, and the data sets that are embodied in these things, and people having their private information used. Things like facial recognition databases.
Mhm.
I worry about security and the problems of adversarial examples and the problems
Yeah.
of you know, all the various attacks, ordering attacks, sample attacks, training attacks,
Mhm.
you know, planting back doors, all of those things that are like uh you know, we've been talking about in the context of machine learning systems now for like 10 years,
Yeah.
and that just get worse and the stakes are getting higher. So
Mhm.
those are all things that I think we have every good reason to worry about. And then on top of that, with the current crop of generative models, I worry about a couple of things. One is that I worry that services will just get a lot worse, right? Like I think that there are a lot of firms that would like to hire their human staff
Mhm.
and replace them with software, even if the software isn't good at the job.
Mhm.
All it has to do is be like plausibly good at the job.
Competent.
And,
Yeah.
and you know, you think about like airlines that replace human operators with automated systems that are more or less designed to discourage you from pursuing compensation for a late flight or for lost luggage or whatever, right?
Mhm.
The you know, those are like, that's not a case of a phone operator losing their job to a robot. That's a case of a phone operator being replaced by a robot because we can pretend the robot works and
Mhm.
therefore we don't have to pay as much compensation. It's not so much about the operator's wage, although that's a piece of it too. It's also about the just like abusing, having a plausible deniability story for abusing users with their
Mhm.
with you know, with impunity.
Right.
And so I worry about that, like, you know, broadly, enshittification of everything, things
Mhm.
just being bad because they're made by robots.
Yeah.
Um, and I worry about bullshit inflation. So I have a friend who's a university professor, and they tell me that now when grad students want letters of reference, they just type 3 bullet points into ChatGPT and it spits out a letter of reference, and they do a light edit and they throw it over the wall.
Mhm.
But of course, this means that letters of reference are proliferating to the point where people who are in a position to hear from students and see their letters of reference are now getting more letters of reference than ever. And so they're going to start feeding them to ChatGPT and asking them to reduce them to bullet points.
Right.
That's that's just awful, right? Like just
Mhm.
having this system where we just like burn an entire rainforest every time someone wants to first inflate 3 bullet points into a bunch of florid nonsense and then deflate it back
Yeah.
to three, you know, subtly altered and probably not very accurate bullet points. It's just bullshit. And then
Mhm.
there's like the actual labor stuff, right? There's like scanning an actor and replacing their likeness with, you know, with a model and then never paying that actor again, right? The SAG
Mhm.
actors on strike today over this,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that that is a thing that we should be absolutely worried about. We should be worried about illustrators getting fired. We should be worried about animators getting fired. There's
Mhm.
probably some writers who are on the chopping block, although the prose that I've seen from LLMs just replaces writing that is bad. And so, you know, if like if you're paying someone to write 2,000 words of nonsense about the first time you ate an egg, so
Yeah.
that the omelet recipe you want to publish gets highly ranked by a search engine, you know, a chatbot can write 2,000 words of nonsense more quickly and cheaply than the person can. And, you know, arguably that job goes away, whatever. I mean, like that person needs a job, but that job doesn't need to exist. It's a little like the argument that if we did Medicare for all, then all the people whose job it is to fight with insurance companies when they try not to pay doctors would be out of a job. It's like, sure,
Yeah.
right, that's true. I want those people to have jobs. Like, I don't want those people to starve, right? I just don't want that job to exist. Like, it's
Yeah.
fine, right?
I mean,
I want asbestos miners to have work, but I don't want
yeah.
anyone to mine asbestos. So
Right.
fine,
Yeah.
right?
Well said.
But you know, there are, like, in acting and I think in other domains, there are like actual displacement activities where you're going to see wage bills being zeroed out by employers. And I think that giving creative laborers an exclusive tradable right to decide who can train a model with their work is not going to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And let me back up one step here and say that I don't think, as a technical matter, it's a copyright infringement to make a copy of a work and then train a model with it. Like I don't think anyone who's serious about copyright thinks that. I think that, like, there are a few high profile grandstanding lawyers who are hoping to win some big settlements rather than have companies like OpenAI take their chances in court. And, like, to be clear, I hate OpenAI and I think it should be abolished, but I just don't think that what it's doing is a copyright infringement, at least not in most cases. And, you know, like the lawsuit that Sarah Silverman has just brought, like, she may have been told by someone who seemed knowledgeable that making a transient copy of a work in order to mathematically analyze it is a copyright violation, but it just isn't, right? And no one, like, the people who disagree with me about everything when it comes to copyright maximalists who think that everything should be copyrighted, don't think that current copyright law prohibits that, although it might. And you know, you know, there is this question, like, could we amend copyright law? And could we amend copyright law to create that exclusive right? And here's where I think, you know, this fails on its own logic. So right now, the problem with this is not that people have the exclusive right to create a model with their likeness, and that or that they lack that exclusive right. The problem is that they lack control over their employers. Right? Their employers are proposing to do this. I mean, as we see, this is a unionized workforce, right, that is entitled to bargain for a minimum contract.
Yeah.
So let's assume that SAG-AFTRA loses that contract fight, and when the strike finally ends, the studios now have the right to take your likeness and use it to train a model.
Right.
And then we amend copyright law out of outrage for this, which is an outrageous thing. An actually outrageous thing that I am outraged by and outraged by the thought of. And we say to actors, now you have the right to control your likeness.
Yep.
The studios, the same studios that they couldn't get to promise not to do this, are going to amend their standard fucking deal. So that it says, by acting on our set today, you let us train this model, right? Like, and moreover, that model becomes our exclusive property that no one else can use. Whereas if, like, we hadn't even created that, then we would at least have this regime in which, at least in many examples, there wouldn't be any copyright in the work that the model produces, because the Copyright Office has been really clear. You don't get a copyright for things that models create. So, you know, if, like, the way we make Pixar movies in the future is not by, like, paying your mom, but by, like, having a couple of executives sit down and type some prompts into a keyboard, you know, on Buena Vista, and then, you know, wander off to the smokehouse for a couple of martinis, and then come back and there's a Pixar movie on their hard drive, and we say to them, fine, there you go, but guess what? Anyone can take that and sell it. There is no copyright in it. Those people are going to be like, fuck it, we're paying the writers and the actors, right, and the animators and everyone, because Disney would rather drink a gallon of warm spit before breakfast every day for the rest of time than give up one micron of copyright. And so, you know, that's one way we could do this. We could also set up collective licensing for it, and that would at least avert this thing where people who do things that I think are harmless, sometimes benign, and maybe eventually artistically impressive, you know, kids making weird shit on the internet, don't turn out to be the only people who aren't allowed to do this. Because in this world, giant corporations retain the right to use models, and kids don't, right? Because they're copyright infringers, whereas the giant corporations can acquire a corpus needed to train a model. And so, you know, you get those, and so then you get this situation where, like, maybe in a decade we look back on this and we go, ugh, I can't believe we ever thought that the garbage art was ever going to be good. But maybe in a decade we look back and we go, I can't believe we ever thought that wasn't going to be important art, right? The way sampling played out, right? Sampling was originally dismissed by a lot of people as not good art. I think a lot of early sampling wasn't good. I think tape loops and early sequencers didn't produce high quality music often, and it took real virtuosity to make it good. But eventually, I think sampling produced really good art. But the regime
better than could have been made without it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
scary.
and I think the regime for sampling now shows you what the trajectory is of an exclusive rights regime for model training, which is that if you want to sample today, you have to be signed to one of the big three labels that control 70% of all the recorded music. You have to sign away your right to control your samples, and then you have to pay them out of your advance for any samples you take.
Right.
And that money doesn't go to an artist, it goes to their shareholders. So every artist is now poorer. Every artist is now funneled into a regime that forces other artists into becoming poorer. On top of all that, we still can't sample the way we used to. If you want to make Public Enemies, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, by the time you cleared all the samples, you'd have to sell every copy of the songs on that album for $150. Because it's just no way to make those albums economically. De La Soul's music was not cleared.
I was gonna say,
years, right? By the time it was cleared, like the front man was dead. And some songs can't be cleared. Some songs will actually just never stream. Right. So we've made all musicians worse off. We've made whole swaths of good art illegal. And we have banished some existing good art to the scrap heap of history. And like we didn't get any of the things we hoped we would get. So we should learn from sampling, right? Sampling should show us what happens when we worry about misappropriation of our work to our economic detriment, and why it's not enough to simply assert control over that work because control doesn't mean successful bargaining. In fact, an exclusive right in a regime where you are never successful bargaining is just a way to transfer rights slowly and inefficiently to giant corporations that just bargain for them.
That's the thing about also the optimistic argument that I hear you making is like, yeah, I mean, there totally are ways that we could shut this down with like the right law and the right politics, right? But where is the incentive? And also like who owns the lawyers and the politicians? Like it's not users and writers and
Well, but we have had like that's where unions come in, right? Like Hollywood's a union town. The reason that there has been any money for anyone in the last 10 years is because of the strikes that happened at the start of the sampling or the streaming era. Right. Like it wasn't law that got writers paid for streaming. It was a strike. It was a union. Right. And it wasn't law that got the writers paid by their agencies, which had done these crazy mergers where they were no longer basically the split for writers went from 10/90 to 90/10, where the agents were taking 90% of the money through these things called package arrangements. And the writers struck against the four giant agencies for 22 months. They fired every agent in Hollywood for 22 months, and they hung together. They had solidarity, and they won that fight, right? Jeez. So that's how we win these fights. And then when you have powerful, creative organizations, they can lobby for law. Then they do have power to lobby for law, and it's important that the law that they lobby for achieve the goal that they're hoping for, which is why I'm still engaged with talking to creative people about why merely getting the right to control training using your work is not going to solve your problem.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a lot of meditation on my first job right out of college into the pandemic, which was copywriting.
Right.
And it was for a video game company even, who I know are automating this stuff now. But it was a lot of like, hey, I'm Tom Bird, like X and Y game designer on like X and Y project, and like I'm not Tom Bird, but like there is no reason to even have a person do that work. And so like wrapped up in that is like, I thought that was like, it was easy work, but it was also like kind of a meaningless role. I think of that as one of those things where like, yeah, in a very utopian sense, like that menial work is gone now, but in a very dystopian sense, like I fed the machine.
Right. Well, and also there's someone out there who fed their family who can't anymore, right? That's a thing too. That matters. Again, like it's not good for the asbestos miners to all be broke, but we don't need anyone to mine asbestos.
Yeah, well said. I don't want to take us too far over. We have hit the hour.
Okay.
Yeah, I also asked you all a quick take questions.
Great.
So I think we can wrap it up there unless there's anything else you
Excellent.
want to touch on. But
Okay.
thank
No,
you so much for this.
still gotta write a book review and also something else before I record a video before I do the household chores and then finally get to end my day. It's been a long day, so
Oh yeah. Godspeed. Thank you so much for your time,
not
Cory.
at all.
Really appreciate
Nice
it.
talking to you.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
insightful. But
Say hi
yeah,
to your folks for me.
absolutely. Yeah, plenty of hugs to your folks as well. But
All right.
enjoy the rest of your Friday.
You
Thank you.
too. Bye.
Bye.